saints and wear a robe and crown. God shall wipe away all tears. God shall wipe away all the tears from every eye. Give us joy for all our fears when we meet Him in that home beyond the sky. God shall wipe away all tears. Well, I think we knew the other one better. And we didn't have the words for it, right? Yeah. 485. Well, I'm bound and determined to sing it at this point. 485. How did you find it? In the land of fadeless day. Not the city four square, not God shall wipe away all tears. We just kept working on it. In the land of fadeless day lies the city four square. It shall never pass away, and there is no night there. God shall wipe away all tears. There's no death, no pain, nor fears, and they count not time by years, for there is no night there. There they need no sunshine bright in the city four square, for the Lamb is all the light, and there is no night there. God shall wipe away all tears. There's no death, no pain, nor fears, and they count not time by years, for there is no night there. All right, that was good. Those are funeral songs. That's why we don't sing them very often. At Pine Knot, they were just weekly songs. Well, the last time we were together, we were talking about how to read not just for distance, but for depth. And one of the ways we said you can read for depth is to look for what? I'm hoping you're using this every day as you're reading through the text. So you got to know the answer. Sue? Recurring words, repetition. You can rest assured that if an author keeps saying a word over and over, he means for you to pay attention to it. But that's not all. There are several more things, and we won't spend as much time on all of these. I just want to make you aware of them. Look for, number 2, comparisons and contrasts. Okay? Look for comparisons and contrasts. And in order to illustrate this, I want you to go to Psalm 1. Psalm 1. And as long as we're in Psalm 1, I'm gonna jump a little ahead of myself. Not only are we looking for comparisons and contrasts, we're also looking for images and emotions. Okay, so what got me to thinking about this week was we were talking in my survey classes about Israelite poetry and how so much of the Bible is written in poetry. Did you notice that? Every few verses in Revelation, somebody breaks out into a poem set to music. Have you noticed that? Every now and then our sermons have broken into that as well. Why? Why is that? Why is so much of the Bible written in poetry? It's easier to remember. It is a memory device. In fact, there are a lot of acrostic poems. An acrostic poem is where each line of the poem begins with a different letter. Usually you go through the alphabet. You know, awesome is highway, best church in town. Creative is the preacher, Devin is his name. You see what I've done there? I've made a little poem about highway. It's easy to remember. Now, the problem with that... Do what? Yoda, yeah. The problem with acrostic poetry in Hebrew is we don't read Hebrew. And so it doesn't always translate into English, and so you may miss it, okay? But poetry it's a memory device. It really is, okay? What else? Why might people write in poetry?
It evokes deeper emotion.
It evokes, by use of imagery, deeper emotion. Now, the Church of Christ I grew up in, that was like, it's not decent or in order. All that emotion. Getting carried away with yourself there with all that emotion. Here's the reality. I'm a preacher and a critiquer of preachers. I don't remember one sermon that has ever moved me to tears. Not a lot of sermons that I acknowledge intellectually, this is right. That point was right. That point was right. That was a great poem at the end, right? Now, Dottie, I saw you roll your eyes at me because you know as well as I do, I'm an emotional person, and sometimes there are sermons that I preach that have affected me so deeply, right? But for the most part, I've never listened to anybody else preach, and well, I've cried because it was bad, but that's different. But Casting Crowns does it to me on a regular basis. It's one thing for me to say, dads, you need to suck it up and be what you ought to be. It's another thing to say, it's a slow fade. When you give yourself away, it's a slow fade. When black and white is turned to gray and thoughts invade, choices are made, a price will be paid when you give yourself away. Daddies never crumble in a day. It's a slow fade. That gets me every time. Daddies never crumble in a day. It's a slow fade. There's something about the poetry and the music together, the images and the emotions that come together. Prophets and poets are not content to give you a list of things to remember. This is big. This is big. It's big in my training of preachers because in the churches of Christ, we've been big on giving you lists to remember. In the first place, in the second place, in the third place, right? The Bible did not come to us in propositions. The Bible did not come to us in propositions to be believed. It came to us in a story into which to be entered. And so you don't ever walk home to your wife at the end of the day, how did your day go? Well, in the first place, my day went, and in the second place, my day went. You don't do that, do you? You tell the story about your day. And if you've got personality, it's humorous. Okay? Yeah.
I think some of that, too, is because the author is shooting for the heart. And
Right. That's emotion. Okay, so I teach my preachers, too. When you preach, you aim at head, heart, and hands, and surely you'll hit something. You aim at head, which is the intellect. You aim at heart, which is the emotion, right? And you aim at the hands, which is action. All right, so when I get done preaching, I want people to either believe something different, feel something different, or go do something different. And so, well, see now, so I'm giving away all of my tactics here. Okay, so that's it. So imagery and emotion work together. So in the book of Psalms, the key feature of Israelite poetry is not rhyme. All right, the key feature in American poetry is rhyme. Roses are red, violets are blue, God's coming in judgment, where are you? Okay, if we were to make up a little poem for the sermon this morning. That's not the way it is in Hebrew. Hebrew doesn't rhyme. And even if it did, again, we wouldn't know it because we don't read Hebrew. So the key feature in Israelite poetry is called parallelism, where the author appears to be saying the same thing again. But he's not just saying the same thing again. When he says it the second time, he is making it deeper. He's making it more concrete. All right, so let me show you what I mean. And we'll talk about comparison and contrast. Right here in Psalms 1. Psalm 1. Let's just look at the first two verses. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. All right, in this little paragraph, we have both comparison, contrasting, and parallelism all together. Okay? What are the parallel lines? What are the similar parallel lines? Yes, yeah. Who walks, who stands, who sits. In the counsel of the wicked, in the seat of scoffers, in the way of sinners. Those are parallel lines. We get the idea, right? Blessed is the person who doesn't hang out with bad people. So why didn't he just say that? Why didn't he just say that? All right, let me ask you, can you see what the poet is saying? Who walks, who sits, who walks, who stands, who sits. Okay, it's everything we do. Is there any kind of progression there? Do what? It becomes more and more involved. In the beginning, you're just what? Walking by, observing the wicked over there. But the next pass, you're actually, you've stood in to listen. And then the third thing, you've pulled up a chair. You walk by and observe, you stop in to listen, you pull up a chair and join. All right, so the poet's not just saying the same thing 3 times. He's talking about a progression of sin. You're blessed if you don't fall into this never-ending cycle. All right, so there's parallel, comparing 3 things, but look at the word that starts verse 2, but. That's a contrast. When you see the word but or yet, you know there's going to be a contrast, right? So what's the contrast? There's one man who there's one man who's walking in the counsel of the wicked, who's standing in the way of sinners, who's sitting in the seat of scoffers. But then there's another man who's doing what?
Delights in the law of the Lord and meditates.
Okay, who's delighting in the law and meditating in it. Again, there's a progression there. You don't just say, oh yeah, I love church. You're actually there. You don't just say, I love God's law. You memorize it, you live it out, right? You meditate on it. And so, blessed is the person who doesn't do this, but who does this. Now, look at verse 3. The man who delights in the law of the Lord, the woman who meditates on it day and night, is compared to what? A tree, here's comparison, planted by streams of water, but there's more. Look at the parallel line. Yields its fruit in season. Leaf does not wither. And all that he does, he prospers. All right, can you see what the poet is saying? What image comes to your mind? I can't read this without an image coming to my mind. Danny, do you know what my favorite tree on campus is? I need to ask Marty this question. If this tree ever goes, I'm done. I'm just going to quit. My favorite tree on campus. Okay, I don't know what kind of tree it is, but I can explain it. You said live oak, and you said, I think it's, is it the one that's like this, and there's a little walkway, it's in front of the student center, and when I walk to work, I purposely have to walk under it. I mean, that thing is massive, and it's got these, in the summertime, these big, luscious leaves hanging off of it. I love to walk under that tree. I mean, it's been there for, I don't know, ever, right? Probably since 1924. or before. I love that tree. And that's the image I get of this big, massive tree. And it's not really affected by the seasons. I mean, it is, but it's planted by water, so it's always got water. It's not affected by the climate. And it's always faithful to yield fruit, right? Good to fish with. How does that work? It has worms. See, it provides for all its inhabitants. I mean, here's a vision. You want to be strong. You want to be planted. You want to be firm. You want to be productive. The way to do it is to delight in the Lord's law and do that, and not be swept by every scheme of wickedness and sinfulness and scoffing. You delight in the Lord, you meditate in His law, you're going to be firm, you're going to be grounded. What's the old song say? Like a tree that's planted by the waters. See, poetry again. I shall not be moved. Verse 4, contrast. The wicked are not so. They're like the chaff that the wind drives away. All right, somebody explain to us what chaff is.
Fresh wheat, junk comes off.
The junk that comes off. Is it like those red peanuts that I like, and that red stuff all comes off, and then you get to the peanut? Like that? So, in one of these visions, you're a nut. Solid, right? Nutritious. In the other, you're just nothing. Driven by the wind. So therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment. Yeah, we've learned that from Revelation 6 and 7, haven't we? Who can stand? Not the wicked. They will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. And so we have a contrast then, again, just in that last verse. I mean, Psalm 1 is easy, and I'm sure you've seen all this before, but this is the way you read for depth. Don't just rush past every line asking yourself, why in the world is he saying that same thing again? He's just wasting my time. Because he's not. He's asking you to go a little bit deeper with him. He's asking you to see what he's saying. He's asking you, he's actually putting you through the meditating on it to see if you can understand what's there. So we look for comparisons and contrasts, okay? We look for images and emotions. Now, I think by the same token, we ought to look for propositions. There are propositions. A lot of Paul's letters, grammatically, we call them imperatives, where he gives commands. There's a lot of that, right? The second half of Paul's letters, full of imperatives. Do this, don't do that. But that's not what most of the Bible is made out of. That's what Paul's letters are made out of. Most of the Old Testament is story and poetry. Okay? Do you have any questions or comments about that? Most of the Bible is made up of story and poetry. So, look for comparisons, contrasts, images, and emotions.
One of the things when we read out loud, or we're asked to read a scripture, we just read it da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and we don't pause, we don't put the emotion that's there
Right.
in the way we pronounce things, you know, and it does make a difference, it really does.
There's a little book called Why Johnny Can't Preach. And the first chapter is called Because Johnny Can't Read. that's the first chapter. And it's true. We're bad readers. And I'm not just talking about our ability to sound out words. I'm talking about our ability to enter into the story world and to see what's there. These aren't just black and white stories on flimsy pages. I try really hard when I read the text to read it with feeling, with emotion, to observe the commas, the colons, right? The exclamation points. And that takes time. And as you were talking, I was just thinking back through being little and having an old King James version where every verse was its own paragraph. You know what I'm talking about? The verses are set apart as their own paragraphs, and then all the words were split up because they were trying to help you understand how to pronounce them. So you had all the pronunciation marks in there, right? And I just remember learning how to read the Bible that way, and there's something about every verse being disconnected in paragraph form that makes me think the whole thing is disconnected. And so what I end up doing is looking for bits here and pieces there that I can somehow string together into my story, when actually it is a story. And so that's why I really appreciate some of our modern translations who have divided the text into paragraphs so I can at least see a reasonably conceived unit of thought. Does that make sense? Seeing it in paragraphs does help. Okay? All right, good point. Any other questions or comments about this?
I think that we're taught to discuss our emotions too. Sit up straight, be quiet, and don't make a mess, and don't offend anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just read it.
Mm-hmm.
I think we are that way as a people.
Yeah, I think you're right. Let me show you. Let me build on that just for a second. Go to 1 Corinthians 2. We're told to deny our emotions, do everything decently and in order, sit up straight, be quiet, right? And we think that's the way Paul did it. I don't know. I hate to call Paul a liar. You know what's coming is going to be good, right? I hate to call Paul a liar. But in 1 Corinthians 2, in 1 Corinthians 1, he's dealing with a church that's divided. And they're divided for a lot of reasons. But one of the main reasons is because they're fighting over who the best preacher is. Some like Scott, some like Devin, some like Randy, some like Tim, and it's just, and they're mad about it, and they're ugly about it. And when Devin preaches, they don't come. Or when Scott preaches, they don't come, and I can't, I'm just liberal. Anyway. So Paul's dealing with that. Some of you say Peter, some of you say Paul, some of you say Apollos, and some of you are really spiritual. You say, well, I'm sorry, I just follow Jesus. That's even a club you can beat people over the head with. And so Paul comes in and he goes, you know what? I'm glad I didn't baptize any of you. And I'm glad you don't think I'm a good preacher. Because when I came to you, brothers, I didn't come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech and wisdom. I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified, and I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling, and my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in a demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Now this is hilarious. Okay, I get it. I get what he's saying. Paul's saying if your measure of unity is based on your appreciation of the preaching style, you don't know unity and you're not listening to the preaching. Okay? You're using worldly standards of wisdom, right, to evaluate the preachers in your church, and you shouldn't be doing that. Okay, so I get his point. But when Paul comes in here and says, when I came to you, I didn't come in that fancy book learning. Are you kidding?